The moment a regular person turns into a monster is one of the most terrifying points in history. There are some names that didn't just commit crimes, they created a kind of fear that stays with us forever. Today, we're going to talk about some of the world's most notorious serial killers and how their dark journey began. Every one of them started with a single drop of innocent blood. When they chose their very first victim, the world had no idea what kind of darkness was about to be unleashed. It was January 1974, a freezing winter night in Seattle. Lynda Ann Healy was a college student at the University of Washington and was loved by everyone. She was the voice people heard every morning on the radio giving the weather report. But on that cold morning in 1974, her voice never came on the air. Her bedroom window had been left slightly open. Ted Bundy, a man who looked perfectly polite, handsome, and well-educated, had slipped into her room without a sound. No one heard a scream. No one in the next room heard a struggle. The next morning, the only thing left behind was a bloodstain on her bed. Bundy had taken her away to a secluded place. This was his first known victim. It was the beginning of a horrific history of violence, where dozens of young women would lose their lives to a man wearing a mask of normalcy. That night, Lynda appeared was just the start of a monster waking up. Next, we travel to June 1978 in a rural part of Ohio. 18-year-old Steven Hicks was standing by the side of the road, looking for a ride. A car pulled up in front of him. The young man driving was Jeffrey Dahmer. Dahmer invited Steven back to his house to hang out and have a few drinks since his parents were out of town. Steven walked into that house trusting a stranger, never knowing he would never leave alive. When Steven eventually tried to leave, something dark snapped inside Dahmer. He grabbed a heavy hammer and hit Steven from behind. After that first murder, Dahmer did things that are almost impossible to imagine. He dismembered the body and hid the remains in plastic bags. That day in 1978 set Dahmer on a path where he no longer saw people as humans, but just as parts to be collected. At the Greyhound bus terminal in Chicago on January 3rd, 1972, 15-year-old Timothy McCoy arrived with big dreams of seeing the city. He was met by a large man named John Wayne Gacy. At the time, Gacy was a highly respected member of his community. He offered to help the teenager and took him to his home. What happened inside that house that night was a total nightmare. Gacy put Timothy in handcuffs, tortured him, and finally strangled him to death. This was Gacy's first kill. He buried Timothy's body under the floorboards of his house. After that incident in 1972, Gacy went on to kill more than 30 other people using the same methods. Timothy McCoy was just the first name on a long list, and it would take years for the world to see the monster hiding behind the clown's makeup. We have to go even further back to London in 1888. The foggy streets of Whitechapel were filled with a sense of dread. Early in the morning on August 31st, 1888, the body of Mary Ann Nichols was found lying on the street. Her throat had been cut with terrifying precision. This was the work of Jack the Ripper. To this day, no one knows who killed Mary Ann in that thick London fog. It remains one of history's greatest mysteries. The sheer brutality of that first murder sent the entire city into a state of panic. Mary Ann Nichols was the first person whose blood was used to write the Ripper's dark legacy, yet his true identity remains a mystery to this very day. In Florida, on November 30th, 1989, we meet Aileen Wuornos. Her life had been incredibly hard and full of pain. That night, she got into a car with a man named Richard Mallory. Aileen later claimed that Richard had attacked her and she shot him in self-defense. Richard Mallory was her first victim, but that one death triggered a deep-seated rage inside her. Over the next year, she went on to kill 6 more men. That rainy night in 1989 turned Aileen into one of the most famous female serial killers ever. It was a hot summer night on July 29, 1976 in the Bronx, New York. Donna Lauria was sitting in a car with a friend just talking and enjoying the evening. Suddenly, a shadow appeared at the car window. Before they could react, a gun went off. Donna Lauria died instantly. This was the first fatal shooting by David Berkowitz, the man who called himself the Son of Sam. Berkowitz later claimed that his neighbor's dog was giving him orders to kill. From that night in 1976, he kept the entire city of New York paralyzed with fear for a year. Donna's death was the first step in a spree that made people terrified to step outside after dark. In Los Angeles on June 28, 1984, Richard Ramirez, known as the Night Stalker, crept through a window into the home of an 80-year-old woman named Jennie Vincow. While she was fast asleep, Ramirez murdered her in a way that was shockingly brutal. This was his first known killing. After that night, the people of Los Angeles began locking every door and window, even in the middle of summer. Ramirez didn't have a specific pattern, he just wanted to spread terror. Jennie Vincow was the beginning of a reign of darkness that made Ramirez one of the most feared men in America. Finally, we go to Plainfield, Wisconsin on December 8, 1954. Mary Hogan ran a small local tavern. That night, the area was completely deserted. A quiet, lonely man named Ed Gein walked into the tavern. No one ever saw Mary Hogan alive again. When Gein killed her and took her back to his farm, he began a sick and twisted hobby. He started making furniture and clothes out of human bone and skin. Mary Hogan was his first victim. For a long time, she was just listed as a missing person. But when the police finally opened the door to Gein's house, the world was horrified by what he had done. Mary Hogan was the first piece in a house of horrors that would eventually inspire some of the scariest horror movies in cinema history. Each of these killers started as an ordinary person, but once the blood of their first victim touched their hands, they changed forever. The monster inside them woke up and gave the world some of its darkest chapters. These first cases remind us that behind a normal face, a terrifying shadow can be hiding. Once someone gets a taste of that darkness, they can almost never find their way back to the light. These stories aren't just about crime. They are a deep look into the darkest corners of the human mind. The killers' names are famous, but the memories of those first innocent victims still carry a heavy sense of tragedy and fear.
Welcome to Crime Reveals.